Good day, good day, good day, beautiful souls. Self Healing Tribe, Earth Angels, Star Seeds, Light Workers, Shaman, and Alchemists, Recovery Tribe. How are we today? Hope Healer here. So grateful, thankful, and blessed to be here. I have a little bit of time before I have to start getting ready for my appointments today. And I wanted to touch base with you guys a little bit on a couple topics that have been coming up a lot lately, and not just in my own personal life, but in the business and in the recovery group and things of that nature. So, why not talk about it when it's fresh on the mind? So, first and foremost, I'm thankful, grateful, and blessed to be here today to share the health, wealth, and knowledge, and to show up for myself and to show up for you, fine people. Um, so, my two topics today are we'll go over the short one. The short one is um, comparison, and then the longer topic that I'm going to have after is communication. So, the really quick once over about comparison. Here lately, I have ran into quite a few instances where people are assuming that they know people's diagnosis. There's a great deal of time that even the person who has the diagnosis doesn't know the diagnosis, or they don't know about their diagnosis, or they haven't done the research on their diagnosis, or have had a second opinion to even know if their diagnosis is actually correct. And so when people are assuming because they knew somebody that had that diagnosis that it's supposed to look a certain way, that's inaccurate. That is false information. Everyone has, whoever has diagnoses that may be similar or the same, or have been diagnosed, but it's probably the wrong diagnosis. It looks different for everyone based on their environment and their trauma. And I want to make this clear because, let's just say, for instance, someone has bipolar or schizophrenia. Okay. A lot of those overlap and mimic trauma. And depending on their level of trauma that they have had in their childhood or the level of trauma they've experienced in their adulthood, the symptoms are different and more intense. So, someone who has schizophrenia who's not experienced a ton of trauma may not act the same as someone who's been diagnosed with schizophrenia who has experienced a ton of trauma. Totally different animals. Okay. I want to say this clear. Just because you know someone that has bipolar, just because you know someone who has schizophrenia, just because you know someone has borderline personality, there's levels of those diagnoses, and there's also other comorbid diagnoses along with them that create different types. Just like borderline, I'm borderline, but there's like four categories of borderline, and then in each category of borderline there's subcategories, and it just depends on your environment, how you grew up, your childhood trauma, your adulthood trauma, all the dynamics. Okay. So that's why sometimes even borderline personality mimics narcissism, because once you start doing the work on your own diagnoses and your own trauma and your own healing, you will understand that assuming that everything looks like this little box is so inaccurate. Okay, that's my short one. Now let's go on and move into the communication. This has been rising up a lot. And I will say, even in my own personal life, just simply because I'm trying to integrate past family that I was estranged from, even my own children, my own adopted parents, things of that nature. because it was not a healthy environment for any of us. And now that we're all working on that, um, communication is definitely numero uno. So, what happens a lot of times is when somebody's actually working on themselves and has always been pretty good at communicating outside of when they're triggered, um, it makes it hard for other people who are not self aware how to communicate to where it's going to be understood because they're not doing the work. They're not trying to understand any differently than they have before. So I've had to have a lot of patience and a lot of practice exercising this communication. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to understand the dynamics and layers. Wow, it's getting really dark. Okay, so anyway, let's talk about where does communication stem from? How do we learn it? How do we not learn it? So, communication starts from when we're itty bitty. So many of us have grown up with, we'll call caregivers who were not attentive to the nurturing needs of a child who may have experienced trauma or grew up in a household where communication wasn't clear, concise, and in a healthy way, right? So sometimes we grow up in a household where communication is just non-existent. Like everyone doesn't talk about their feelings, and we're not allowed to. That's not safe. Um, or we grow up in a household where communication is clearly nothing but rage and anger and physical stuff. And then we grow up in households where communication is all about safe touch, hugs, cuddling and understanding that, this is communicating too. But so many of us have grown up in households where none of the normal communication was there. Or if it was just minimal. And if you grew up in a household where it was, that's great. That's wonderful. And hopefully that you carry passing that on, you know, learning to tap into your own emotions and how to express them safely to where you're being heard and other people, can safely express theirs to you. But the majority of the world, this is not true. So, as adults, we grow up having miscommunication issues quite frequently, especially in our interpersonal relationships, in parent child relationships, in friendships. And, if we grew up having trauma as a child, we usually tend to lash out or shut down. And so as an adult, we have to go, okay, it is my choice and responsibility to learn how to communicate effectively. And how can I do that? So it starts with reparenting, reparenting your communication skills because we didn't have them properly and effectively communicated to us. So we have to do that ourselves. And that starts with self. We have to work on ourself. And that is understanding that the childhood dynamic of communication was off and having some self compassion for that. Holding space for, I didn't learn this, so it's okay that I don't know how, and I'm going to do it now. Um, and understanding that the how the childhood communication was off. So like start going and looking back and going, were we allowed to emotionally connect, or were we allowed to communicate other ways other than verbal. Start looking into where you had some good stuff and where you may had lacking. Emotional intelligence and perception. So that's working on self again. So, as long as we're trying to better ourselves and lead our way up and being more connected with who we are, we can start having better emotional intelligence and perception of the views that someone else may be communicating to us. Because if we're not working on our inner wounds and our trauma and the things that we've experienced, we bring those into our communication styles as an adult. We get triggered, our emotions get tied into some kind of unhealthy communication, and we do that instead of being in the moment with a new person and not the old experience. Active listening is another reason that people have miscommunication. A lot of times people only hear certain things, what they want to respond to, what they get triggered by. So if you're active listening, okay, you're able to basically say back what they just expressed to you in some shape, form, or fashion, not verbatim, but you can express to them, I heard you because, okay, you just told me that you're feeling alone, you're feeling isolated, and you would like to have a connection right now in some healthy fashion, and I hear you. So, if you're active listening, you can ask questions to clarify, and you can also reply with letting them know that you heard what they're saying. Okay. So let's go back to reparenting our communication skills. We can do that through writing feelings out and rereading them and seeing if you reconnect with those feelings by what you wrote. The second one is look up other descriptive words, because a lot of times we have emotions, but we don't know how to express them. And so tapping in and feeling those emotions through other ways is going to be able to communicate those better. So like when people say, I see red, okay, well, that's a descriptive word for feeling angry, right? So let's go into that a little bit deeper. When we feel sad, how does it feel? What color does it feel like? What does that feel like? And find other descriptive words. Go in the dictionary, go online, Google what else is another word for blah. Number 3, time out. So when we're in the middle of communicating and having I won't say argument, but a misunderstanding, it's usually because someone got triggered. Now, the hardest thing to do, but the easiest way to fix it is to stop what you're doing, separate yourselves, and go write down what's on your mind, and then go over it, and then come back after you guys have de-escalated, because there's nothing going to get solved in the communication if someone is triggered and all you're doing is arguing and all you're doing is seeing one side of things. You're not going to be open to receive the other side of the communication. So being able to just say, whoa, okay. And that's hard because a lot of people with trauma are like, you're not hearing me. No, I'm not walking away. You better listen. We're going to fix this now. But nothing's going to get fixed until that happens. Okay. Ask questions to clarify. It's another great tool that we can use in order to have better communication. So if maybe you feel like your trauma goggles are on and you're hearing it and taking it personal when it may not be, or you feel like it's being said a certain way, let's ask questions to clarify without emotion, without anger, without being like, what do we call it? like low blowing someone, like low ball, like low key, like hating on them for it, just ask a question like, did you mean that you're mad at me, or did you mean that you're hurt? Or, clarifying questions are going to be a key element to be able to communicate effectively. Um, Self compassion for growing up in a home that was not good at communicating. So, talk to your inner child, hold space for your inner child, and while you're hugging yourself, go, I am grateful for the experiences that I had, even though they were hard, and I'm having a hard time now learning to communicate, but I am going to show myself compassion because I didn't know any better, and I am showing up for myself now to communicate in a much healthier way. Okay? So self-compassion. You know, go, I am learning to communicate now. I am responsible for doing that, and I'm allowed to do that for myself. Um, Forgiving your parents or your parental figures, caregivers, um, for not knowing better either, because most likely it's been passed down. They didn't know how to communicate because their caregivers didn't know how to communicate. Okay. So no matter what that looked like in your childhood home, if it showed anger and rage, no emotional expressions in communication, inability to feel safely to speak your emotions or how you felt about a situation, you have to go into each of those layers and start understanding that it's okay, find safe people to communicate with, know who you're trying to communicate with. If you're communicating with someone that is clearly not able to communicate, it's wasting your time. Now, I know personally as a child, because the emotional intelligence level and communication as a child, like even under 10 years old, was a lot greater. And I hate saying this, but this is true, than my own adopted parents. So, as a child, when I started to learn how to write or draw, I used those amazing tools to express how I felt. Like, I would get in trouble for something, and so I would draw them a picture or I would write them a letter and I would stick it under their door and then go back to my room as I was in trouble. And that's how I would communicate. Letter writing is such an amazing tool that I've used my entire life. And I think that's an amazing tool that everyone can use. Okay, and then last but not least, practice, practice, practice. And practice before it gets to the point where you have to use those skills so you have them ready. Okay, and practice with people that you're safe with. Um, Even like just put on a hypothetical situation, okay? What I call chair talk. And if you don't have someone else to sit in the chair across from you, you can sit in the chair from across from you and act as the other person who may or may not have good communication skills. And you can practice how you're going to respond and not react out of emotion. How are you going to handle this situation? Um, so anyway, yeah, if you guys have any more questions, please let me know. I will be here to assist in any way that I can. I love you. Blessings, light, and love. Have a great and wonderful rest of your day. Bye.